Find Something More, Find Your Way Home. I'm very excited to continue with my interview with my good friend, Kim. And this is part 2 of her amazing conversion story. Welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for sharing with us again.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back to tell you the rest of the story.
Which is very exciting. And to do a general recap, Kim has a story growing up with a lot of pain, a lot of abuse, and sexual abuse, which is so common, unfortunately, in our society today, emotional abuse, some physical abuse, and she ended up drinking heavily and getting into relationships that were intimate and ultimately harmful, and abortion, and so she ends up at a real all-time low. And I'm going to let Kim fill in the blanks as to what happens with her, because we were moving on the up and up at the end of the last show, and I'm sure that people who are tuning in again are excited to hear the rest. So Kim, please continue.
Okay, so as you mentioned, I definitely had hit a pretty hard bottom in my drinking and in my life in general. And I had found sobriety by the grace of God when I was in the military in North Carolina. And then shortly after I got sober, I'd say about 9 or 10 months after I got sober, I met a guy who was also in the Coast Guard. And just because I got sober and just because I stopped drinking didn't mean that all of a sudden all my behaviors were going to be like instantly better. And he probably, I know he wasn't the right person for me, and he definitely wasn't who God had in mind for me. But I couldn't live without him. That's literally what it felt like, that intense like codependency, and I need you to save me and help me feel better, and really the fear of being alone, right? Like now I'm not drinking and I'm feeling in a way that I had never felt before. So he gets transferred to Hawaii, and that's part of why I got transferred to Hawaii. I neglected to share that part, or I didn't get to that part in part 1. So he's also in the picture when I moved to Hawaii. We were married in the church. In hindsight, like God was talking to me, right? And I wasn't listening.
What were the red flags that you ignored? Because I know as a spiritual director and counselor, I often marvel at how the human being can just, the red flags are rosy, they're not red. Looking
Right.
back, what were the signs that you didn't want to see?
So the drinking, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to look at that. He really couldn't express himself like I needed, or like what I thought was appropriate. And he basically came right out and said, this is overwhelming for me. Like, you're a lot for me. And this whole situation is a lot for me. And I kind of ignored that.
The
And
marriage, meaning the situation, meaning the
yeah, like,
marriage?
the situation meaning like being with me,
Oh.
before we even got married. So, like, it was pretty clear.
Mm.
And somehow and the thought of that terrified me, right? The thought of that launched me into like massive anxiety and fear. Like, so what I really kind of quickly came to learn was that I had this whole other addiction, right? And I was addicted to people, like I'm not in relationship with people. I take them hostage, right? Like it was really sad. And at the time I was just so focused on what I thought I needed, and it was almost there was beyond thought, right? It was like I absolutely was so afraid and had so much fear and did not think that I could exist without, somebody else. I was never really by myself. I didn't know how to be by myself. I didn't know the most fundamental things about those kind of boundaries, right? Like, that ideally I need to learn how to be alone, right? And that I need to learn how to hear somebody's voice and what they're actually saying, and stop kind of creating a situation that wasn't there.
What would you advise someone who has that tendency, who just can't imagine being without someone, who can't imagine being alone, and therefore clings to someone to try to make it work?
So there's I can say what I did, and I advise a lot of my clients to do this is, if there's any kind of drugs and alcohol, um, any kind of that kind of dysfunction in your family, or you're aware of, Al-Anon, that program, Al-Anon Family Systems, is an amazing, amazing program. It really speaks to the very heart of that, and it can help people really learn how to love themselves, how to be okay with themselves, and how to break that bondage. But even more importantly is to really, kind of what I did, and I talk about this a little bit later in my story, but is I really learned how to, in a very, very practical, simple way, like when I was feeling super needy and feeling like I couldn't be alone, I would literally just call out to God. And I would, and it wasn't pretending, but in a way, I'll just be very real. It was like, okay, I know that God is here and he's sitting with me in my living room, and I'm going to be okay. And I'm just going to believe that. And I'm going to, there's a saying in 12-step, you fake it till you make it. And in a lot of ways, I kind of moved through that. But I also, my heart was open. Like I wanted to heal. I didn't want to have that kind of, like almost like addiction for another human being. And so, that's what I recommend. I recommend that learn about boundaries, learn about healthy boundaries, and really invite God in to heal you and to show you what healthy relationships look like. And ultimately, he's who you go to fill those needs, right? Because there was no human being that could ever fill those needs. Like that husband never filled those needs. He never could have, because those kind of needs, they originate way back from childhood, right? They originate from from needs that my parents didn't provide for me. And so, at that point, it's really God. It's really, what I have found and what I find over and over again with my clients is it's God who has to heal that part of us. You'll hear a lot of, it's a God-shaped hole. That's kind of the secular way to say, but it really is. Like, there's no other cure for that, I mean,
you've said clients, and I don't think our listeners know what you do necessarily. So could you tell them?
Yeah. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I work for community mental health agency. So I work with seriously mentally ill. So the most mentally ill in our population, and those that are very poor, kind of, when you see homeless people on the streets that are, talking to themselves, and those are my people. Those are my clients, people that, have been in and out of psychiatric hospitals 30, 40 plus times in their lives. I mean, a lifetime of really serious mental illness. And then other people, another huge group that I work with is trauma survivors, right? Trauma survivors of, especially women who have survived sexual abuse or any kind of sexual assault. That's also the other population that I work with.
So for you listeners, you're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. This is Find Something More, Find Your Way Home. And normally I have my partner Kendra with me. Today I have Kim. Kendra will be back next week. We can all make fun of her because she's lying on some beach somewhere in Mexico, and it's not okay that she's there, and most of us are not. But
we're really happy for her, honestly.
Honestly, we are. We love you, Kendra. And Kendra is being a big support of Kim, by the way. So we also have this show on YouTube. You can always go there if you miss a show or you want to watch it that way. Go to youtube.com and search for Queen of Peace Media, and then you'll see our show on there, or you could go to queenofpeacemedia.com as well. So thank you, Kim, for sharing your story up to this point. So you're married, you're newly sober, you're in Hawaii, and last week you mentioned how God was guiding you to this monastery and did so by way of making your experience there mimic the home, the smells, the sights of your beloved grandmother who'd passed away, who was a very holy woman. Yes. So that was very uncanny. If you want to hear about that, please see the show from next week. But can you tell us what happens next?
Sure. So, that night where this amazing group of monastics, they absolutely love the Blessed Mother. And, part of their mission was to work with people in 12-step recovery, and to offer healing for people. I mean, they did some incredible work. They regularly had groups up there, and they were specifically spiritual groups, for people in recovery, and get to kind of work through the steps, like with a priest and with a monastic nun, and even especially the confession, when you talk about the 4-step, and you really have to look at your part and all of your sins and everything you've done. So they were amazing. They had already worked, that's what the work that they were doing. And then I just, as I shared in the last session, part 1, Sister Mary Jo, who reminded me so much of my grandmother. We just had this instant connection. And so we just started an inner healing journey. And so what that looks like is, what we did was you basically, you look at, intergenerational trauma, intergenerational sin. The sins of the father are displaced 4 generations, the book of Exodus. And so, and the healing power of the cross knows no boundaries, right? God isn't bound by time like us humans are, right? And so what was explained to me was that, Jesus can heal all before and all after, and she really invited me to go back 4 generations and to, as much as I could, like, gather research about my family. Those were interesting conversations because, the research was about the sin of the family, right? Really, because the idea was that we're gonna ask Jesus to heal that part of me, right? Like 4 generations back.
Yeah, and I know there's a bank robber who said it wasn't his fault. Back in my family, he said it was a brain tumor's fault.
Oh, geez.
So he got out. So that explains a lot, And Kim, I do appreciate that you work with people who talk to themselves, because, that could be me anytime, at any point in this show.
No
Just go with it.
Okay. So I went back, I had those conversations. Some were received positively, most were not. People were a little kind of like taken aback. But that's okay. I did what I needed to do. And so we started this process. This was an 18-month long process.
Did you dig up something really interesting? Or do you remember?
I kind of got more detail from an aunt who got sober shortly before me, on my dad's side. And it unfortunately it was just a lot of sad stuff, a lot of pain, a lot of their trauma. What I did learn is, for my dad, that was so abusive. I just learned that my abuse did not compare, at all with what he went through. And it was, what God was doing is he was starting to soften my heart. I didn't know. I felt really called. Like, it was very clear that I needed to do this. And I absolutely, and the whole part of, like, you said it beautifully, God really had prepared me to go to the monastery, and because, that my grandmother her home was always a safe place, that he was very clearly telling me in every way, shape, and form, like all my senses, that was safe for me. And that's what my spiritual director really kind of shared with me. And she was right. And she shared it with me on that very first night. She had no idea my story or what work we would do. And it was pretty powerful.
What did she share with you?
She just said, I think that God wants you to feel safe here. He wants you to feel comfortable here. And she was absolutely right, and so what we did was we kind of, I would come up, I would show up for our sessions, and I would tell her everything that I had learned. We would always be in prayer, and she would just lift up what had happened to the Lord and ask him. And she would do a lot of guided imagery, which was really cool. And she would ask, God to heal, places in my life where healing needed to happen, or where, he wanted healing to happen. And, and so we get to my birth story. And, this is like one of the most powerful experiences I've ever been through in my life. And, So we get to my birth story, and I had explained to her how my parents met, and they didn't really know each other, and how my mom was alone when when she gave birth, and how my dad was at a bar drinking, and how my mom was afraid and she didn't know what was in store for her, right? And she had the courage to choose to have me. And then I talked about, my biggest thing, when you hear I think the most salient piece of that first part of my talk is having this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't wanted and I wasn't loved. And I was explicitly told that by both parents. And it was, an ongoing. It wasn't just like I would sit at the feet of my mom while she was washing dishes and hold on to her leg and say, "Mommy, Mommy, do you love me? Mommy, Mommy, do you love me?" And she would just like kick me away, So it was something that was so ingrained in me and such a part of like I just didn't know why I had gone through. I had shared before in the last session, like a lot of whys, like why me? Why these experiences? Why did you let a little girl go through all of this? And so as we prayed, and she invited, through guided imagery, she invited me, we talked about being in the hospital room and that if my father, she was so compassionate, and really it was the compassion of Christ that she really kind of, she painted a picture, she created a picture of how God would have wanted it. Right, that my father would have been there by my mom's side, and that he would have been there nurturing her. And then, as my mom was giving birth to me, that it was funny because I had the full-on picture, and she didn't go into a ton of detail, but my dad was there, my mom was there, the scrubs, like what she was wearing, and then Jesus was the obstetrician, like he had the gloves on, and so. So Sister Mary Jo says, your mom feels loved, and she feels just safe, and your dad is there and he's excited, and then she gives birth to you, and then Jesus reaches down and he delivers you, and he holds you in his hands, and he lifts you up to God the Father. And as she's saying this, like I am like weeping, right? I'm weeping and sobbing and crying, and all I'm saying, and I'm not saying this out loud, but internally I'm like, but why, Lord? Why, Lord? Why would you bring me into this world? And I mean, because that's been like the cry of my heart and soul of my whole life, right? And at that time I was 25 years old, 25 years. And so all of a sudden, Sister Mary Jo says, and the reason why, and I'm like, the reason why that the Lord brought you into this, into this world was to bring healing to future generations, to bring healing to all those who have hurt and who have suffered in ways that you have suffered, and to your family, to, prior generations and future generations, right? And so I just I think about it, and it was just so profound on so many levels that, that in that moment that God answered, right? And he answered these questions in such a powerful and deep way that my heart and soul knew, right, that I was loved and that I was wanted, and that that in some way, like I couldn't articulate this then, but subsequent years have shown that there was a purpose for my life, right? There was a purpose for the pain and suffering, and that if my dad suffered in the way that he had suffered, he would have chosen to love me. He would have chosen to live according to God's will. And the same with my mom, right? Like if we're truly living according to God's will, right? And we're truly seeking what he wants for us and how he wants for us to live, then, he wants the best for us, right? He gave us free will, and we get to decide. And, and unfortunately, we don't always make the best decisions or the right decisions, and we sin, and sin has so many consequences. And so I really got to see that. And so what ensued was, I kind of went through my life with her for the next, several months. In this process, I have to be real with you, my first 5 years of sobriety were They were horrible. They were hellacious, sprinkled with these like crazy, incredible moments that I was just like, it would take me years to process.
So I
Right?
want to let the readers, well, you might be reading something and not paying attention. Want to let the listeners know that Kim was just sharing an inner healing experience with a nun named Sister Mary Jo in a monastery. And this is an inner healing process whereby the sister used guided prayer, which is also an Ignatian technique formulated by, I'm sure many people did it before, St. Ignatius of Loyola, but he in particular perfected this spirituality where you enter into a scene and meet Jesus, meet God there somehow. And what that does is, if you have a traumatic memory and the Lord leads you back into that memory and you are feeling everything you felt at that time, then he literally changes the memory inside of us so that our brain processes it differently, and it's no longer a trauma because he was there. He was there. He exists in time and outside of time. So what Kim experienced was real, in that, yes, she had a birth where her father was away drinking. Her mother was scared, wasn't sure if she even wanted her. But the truth within that was also that the Lord really wanted her. And as Kim was just saying, that had her father and mother been able to follow God's will, they too, in the core of their souls, would have delighted in her and wanted her. So the truth was within that terrible situation, that it was sprinkled with God all along, but we can't see Jesus. We don't know he's there. We don't know the Blessed Mother's there. We don't know all of heaven is with us when we're in trauma. That is blocked out. That reality of being helped and loved is erased in the moment and needs to often be reinserted through a healing experience later on in life. Do you want to add anything to that? Did I cover that?
No, it was beautifully done.
What happens next?
So what happens next is I start having a lot of memories. And I actually had been having memories already, and I referenced them in the last talk. But so I would wake up in the middle of the night, in different rooms in my house while I was going through this process, like just in the, just curled up in the corner, like, rocking myself.
And you didn't know how you got there?
Had no idea how I got there. And that's where I was having those visceral memories. Like I was actually in the abuse. I was experiencing the abuse. That happened so many times. I literally was tormented. I wanted so badly to have pictures, like to have like actual memories where I could have images, because I have a sense of who the perpetrators were. There were more than one. But I don't have like the definitive, like visual, like I know that's who it was. And I used to, really, to Sister Mary Jo, and who, by the way, has a master's degree in working with severely emotionally disturbed. So was very educated and understood what was going on. And she just said, draw pictures. She had me do all these different kinds of things. And basically, if God doesn't want me to remember, I'm not going to remember. And, I shouldn't say it that way. I'm not going to have the visual for whatever reason. And I was able to surrender that. But I really believe that a lot of what was going on was, yes, I was remembering, but I was also like, the devil was not happy. The devil was not happy that I was, that this, if you think about this was my biggest hurt, my biggest pain. And the devil knew what was coming as a result of this healing, right? And that's where the spiritual attacks, like I've always experienced something throughout my life. Those are other stories, but this was profound. It was intense. It was scary beyond belief. And I just prayed. I prayed with every part of my being,
So could you share with us what the attacks were like from the evil one? And you were saying that the first 5 or 7 years of your sobriety, you said it was hellacious. It was that bad?
They just remembering what I had been through, and then the panic and the anxiety and the fear. So the attacks just were like this overwhelming anxiety. like, I, suffered from panic disorder, but my panic disorder is a very special kind of panic that you have in the middle of the night and that just wakes you up.
Oh.
And so I would have up to 20 plus panic attacks in a night. I mean, when I'm talking like attacked, I'm talking it was unbelievable, right? And so anyway, so what I would do is I would pray, and then I was at that monastery a lot. and and they would, there was an incredible group of women, and they would hold me. We would sit in the chapel in front of the tabernacle, and they would just wrap their arms around me, and they would love me. And for the first time in my life, like, I could accept their love. Like, I could accept those arms around me, because I just knew that I knew, right? Like, they just loved me with the love of God, and he just was using them, and and the healing began, right? And it began in such just a powerful way. So I stayed there. I spent a lot of time at that monastery. I was a part of what they still do. It's called Basic Christian Community. And so I went on my first retreat, and love is like such a part of my story, and so this retreat, the Benedictines, a couple of the monastics were, they were part of the leadership of the retreat, and it was ecumenical, like all were invited, but it was a Catholic retreat, which I thought was really beautiful, because you could come from any faith, like any Christian faith. And so the first night, you go to confession, and you learn about, God the Father, like, just in a deeper way. And then the second day you learn about, you learn about, and the focus is Jesus. And then on the third day, it's the Holy Spirit, and the Blessed Mother is just like woven all the way through. And so, and I won't spend too much time there, but again, that was a part of my healing. There was some really profound moments that happened. And one of the most beautiful things, how so many times when God, it feels like, we experience these really special moments with God, and we feel like we're the only person in the world, right? Like, it's just designed for us. And I love how God does that, and yet loves everybody the same. And so we were serenaded one morning. Like, we woke up and they were literally singing to us. And the music, these musicians were so beautiful. They came into your room, and it was gentle and it was peaceful, and they just serenaded us these loves. It was beautiful. And then, like, after, like, later that day, and just the love of Jesus, right? And so later that day, we had been on like some talk, and then we came back to our rooms, and there was just tons of love letters all over our bed. I mean, it was just like, so that's kind of what it was like there. It was like super hard and painful, and then it was super loving, right? And so it was just this, like, but I understood, I was really beginning to understand that was just a part of the process. Like, I literally felt like the Lord was like gutting me to my core. Like, we're going to handle this.
Let's take our break now. Isn't
Okay.
that terrible that I'm cutting you off? So
No,
let's take a
that's fine.
break. You've been listening to Find Something More, Find Your Way Home on Radio Maria.
That was perfect what you said. Yeah, she had a master's degree in working with the emotionally disturbed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she was just like,
She knew her stuff.
ooh, amazing human being. Oh, and my husband just bought me a trip to Hawaii after listening to that first part. Yesterday, he bought it on Tuesday, so I could go see her. I reached out. I know. Yeah.
Oh,
I haven't been there since I left. Yeah.
that's wonderful.
That's
really
cool.
That's really great. So welcome back. We've been listening to Kim's story of healing from trauma and abuse, and she was just taken through inner healing memory prayer with an amazing nun named Sister Mary Jo. And what happens next?
We get word that my husband is getting transferred to Los Angeles, and I also make the decision that I'm going to leave active duty in the military, and then I'm going to pursue my education. So I get to go back to undergrad, and I study psychology, and I really take advantage of just the time that I had. I was in a prayer group with a lot of really holy women. I was going to daily mass. I went to weekly confession from a Monsignor that I developed a really good relationship with, which it was a really powerful time in my life. And I really got to, again, that inner healing process didn't end in Hawaii. It continued, right? And it continued into the present. And I got to work through a lot of that. He was a really amazing, amazing human being, and he helped me heal even more. And there was also a period where I got to go back home. I got to go back home for about 3 months to the East Coast. And the Lord was really clear with me that when I went home, that I was to connect with my dad, who I spoke to very little, who I saw very infrequently, who I was very, very uncomfortable being around. And I certainly, there was no real touching. It was very a lot of distance. And so I went home and, we we went to mass together. Well, first we went to confession together.
Really?
Yeah, I talked to him about, what I was going through, what process I had embarked on and what God was doing through me, and they had been getting rosaries from me and all kinds of spiritual cards from me for the last, 2-3+ years. And, I was sober, and that was like a miracle for everybody. They couldn't believe it. And so it was, that was a really important piece of this. I, at every mass, at every daily mass, I was praying for my dad. I was praying. That was a big part of the inner healing journey, is to pray at mass, right after the consecration, right then, is to pray and to lift that up to Jesus and to ask him to heal my family.
Did you have a lot of anger in your heart towards your dad that you were dealing with?
Oh, absolutely. I for many, many years, I wanted to kill my dad. I wanted my dad dead. It was many, many years. Even into sobriety, I struggled. Not quite the same hatred, but I definitely felt very uncomfortable, and I just didn't feel right when I thought about him, and it still had a lot of power over my life. And so when I went back east, he agreed to go to confession, and he went, and I went, and I remember when he wasn't a very eloquent man, but when he came out of confession, he was like, Kim, I could get hit by a bus right now and I would be okay. And so I was like, okay, I'm glad that
I can arrange that. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No, so we went to the church that I talked about, that I first went to Catholic school, the church that was a part of that parish. And we went to mass with him and was able to hold his hand during the Our Father and not feel like complete heebie-jeebies, and just, that was powerful. I never thought that would happen. And just to the fact that he went to confession and just started watching and seeing changes in my family, and really evident changes, mom going back to church, going back to mass. And so God started putting all of this stuff in motion, which was really cool.
Was that because of you that your mom started to go to mass?
Yeah, I think so. That's what they say. And I believe it was Jesus, right? It was part of that inner healing process, and our relationship got a lot better, me and my mom.
Did you have to forgive her and go through the same process?
Oh, yeah. So that's absolutely a part of this, is I had to forgive him, right?
But your mom too.
Absolutely. Had to forgive mom. Mom actually took longer to forgive.
Oh,
and mom took longer to forgive because it took me a while to realize she had always had that savior complex, right? She was the one who rescued me and protected me. And as I kind of went through this process of really looking at my life and what had gone on, she was a part of it, right? She didn't protect me as she should have. She didn't, we really should have left, by today's standards, I would have been removed, CPS would have removed me. And so, that happens, and, the relationships start to heal. I go back to the West Coast. My relationship with my husband, there was never really a relationship there. It was, unfortunately, it really, I don't believe a marriage ever occurred. And and there was sexual abuse towards the end, and his drinking was out of control. And those women that I was in that spiritual group with, another gal in that group, her husband had perpetrated sexual abuse against her, and you don't hear a lot about that in marriage. And again, God's grace put me in that setting where I was able to really identify that and kind of move through that and pray through that and leave that relationship. I went on a couple years later to marry the father of my children. I went to graduate school. I had really, really severe illness while I was in graduate school. I was very sick for about almost 10 years. But I was in graduate school and I was sick and I was suffering. I was later diagnosed with Crohn's. I nearly died. It was a lot of hard stuff. I had 2 beautiful children while I was in graduate school, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody. It took me 4 years.
What would you not recommend, to have 2 beautiful children, or to...
No, in graduate school. Sorry. Like, it was insane. I was working full time. I was pregnant. I had 2 kids.
And this is with a second husband.
It's my second husband.
Okay.
And, I was in graduate school to become a marriage and family therapist. And, it was very clear to me that this is how I was going to bring healing to people, right? Like, I was going to heal the broken, the wounded, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, physically, in whatever way I could. And so that was an incredibly trying time in my life, to be as ill as I was. And yet so many people, like, God was using me even in that experience, because there was a whole lot of more whys, why this pain, why this suffering. But I got to tell you, in that kind of suffering, the kind of closeness that we get with Jesus is amazing. Like, he always gives purpose to the pain. If we're willing to surrender to him in whatever we walk through, and I've walked through so much pain in my life. And, because of what he's done for me and taught me how to just surrender it and offer it up to him, he uses it in such powerful ways. When I was in graduate school and I was nearing the end, and I was pregnant with my son, and I was very, very sick. I had to stop working. I had my first individual therapy session. And in my first individual therapy session, my very first client showed up and shared her sexual abuse story for the very first time. And I remember being in session, like, and the Holy Spirit just pouring over me and just feeling like, oh my gosh, like, and I couldn't say to her out loud, like, I was listening, but I was like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense. Like, I knew what she was going through, and I never had to tell her what I went through, right? She just knew that I knew. And I remember, like, at first being afraid, and, this just started happening over and over and over again. And God, would use so many experiences, like obscure experiences, tons of experience in my life, to help treat these people, right? Because there's something really powerful about when we walk through something ourselves, as a clinician, as someone who provides this kind of healing to people. There is a sense of knowing, and now neurobiologically we understand why. We have more understanding, and hopefully I can share that in another
I can't wait for that show.
Yeah. So, God he has literally blown me out of the water so many times, in so many different kinds of sessions. I finished graduate school, there was 2 populations I was never going to work with, and I was never going to work with, like, children that were abused, like in child protective services, and I was never going to work with severely mentally ill. And so when we moved to Northern California, I end up working for Child Protective Services, and absolutely love the job. I mean, love it in a way that I can't even describe to you. And again, God used, like, all that pain, because he had been healing me, right? It wasn't like you can't do that job when you haven't done that work and you haven't experienced healing. And by the grace of God, he had already prepared me. He had prepared me all those years, prepared me at the monastery. He had a purpose for all of that pain. He had a purpose. And what it needed, all he needed from me was, yes, Lord, I'm here. Use me, Lord. And, when I was there for 8 years. And during that time, I worked with a family. A wonderful family, who had taken in a girl whose family of origin lived in Hawaii. And so this family, Christian family, God sent me many, many Christian families, which was really powerful in Northern California. It was awesome. And so this family was going to Hawaii, and just brought this, out of their own money. They brought this girl to Hawaii to visit family. And one of the times that they went, they're like, "Hey, Kim, we know you lived in Hawaii, and we're wondering if you can recommend like any places that, we could visit." And so like I at first I was like, and I would share about God, and and I would, I'd let the Spirit kind of lead me and guide me into what I would share. But so I'm like kind of doing it in a general way, and they didn't really know my history. And so I told them about a burger place, and I said, but if you happen to be in the northern part of the island, there's this amazing monastery, and if you go, ask for Sister Mary Jo. And so they, a month goes by, and, I'm at my next home visit with them, and they're grinning from ear to ear when I show up for this home visit. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I had completely forgotten about my recommendation about where to go. And at the time, and I'll just insert this quickly, and I wish I could give it more credence, but, unfortunately, my second marriage didn't work. I was married outside of the church. I kind of went against, again, very disobedient, like not listening to God. Like, you know what, God, I'll fix him, and, and he'll become Catholic. And we're going to, he's going to do everything that I need him to do. And unfortunately, it didn't work, and we divorced. And so we had divorced already prior to this, and I had I was sharing custody, raising my two kids. And so I had been divorced for about 3 years, and I had met my current husband. I didn't know it was going to be my husband, and I was no longer going to the Catholic Church. I was going to an outside Christian church. And there was a lot of pain and suffering around that. And I don't want anybody to think that I left. It was not an easy decision at the time. It was for my ex-husband, who believed in God, but couldn't be a part of the Catholic Church. He tried, but he just could never follow through all the way with RCIA. And I later understood why. But so I was kind of, my current husband was like, he believes in God. He's Catholic. He's like, I love that you're spiritual. I love how much you love Jesus, because I never stopped loving Jesus. I never stopped being close to the Lord, but I didn't get the Eucharist. And I have to tell all of you that it broke my heart. It broke my heart to not have the Eucharist for those years, and the Blessed Mother, and so much of what the church, the richness of the church offers us. It is profound, especially when you know it and you leave it. And I never thought in a million years that I would have left it. And I did. And, and to come, and so when I met my husband, Michael, he said, I just can't go to those churches. Like, I just can't. I have to stay within the Catholic Church. So I was discerning. I was having this hard time of coming back, and I just wasn't sure. And so I just have to tell you that, because that's what was going on with me spiritually. So I'm at the home visit again, right? So I'm there, and they're grinning, and they sit me down, and they say, hey, so when we were in Hawaii, and I was like, oh, they're like, yeah, we went to the monastery. And I said, what? Like, you went to the monastery? Yeah. So they went with my foster youth, who, right, like, he takes her, and I said, and then we asked for Sister Mary Jo, and we told her Kim Wells, and she said, oh my gosh, Kim Wells. And she was so happy, and she was so excited, and they made an appointment, and they went back with her the next day, and they brought me all these pictures, and this is how powerful our God is. They gave me like a card, and when I looked at the card, it was her handwriting, and on the bottom of the card was like a medallion. I didn't know what it was. It was in this plastic wrapping, and then I felt it, and it was a Benedictine medal, and the Benedictine medal that they wear. And I just started to tear up, because in that moment, I knew what God was saying to me. He had for this to even happen, right, for her, the blessings are so enormous for everybody involved. Like, they got to go there, and they're like, she never told them my story, but they got to meet her and talk to her, and she got to see, like, what her faithfulness to God brought, right? Like, here I am, 15 years later, ministering to people, to this girl who was abused, who went through horrible abuse, whose father was an alcoholic, whose parents died. and like just seeing how the Lord used me, how the Lord used her, and how the Lord used me. And I got to see pictures of her with this foster youth. I mean,
Sister
like,
Mary Jo.
yes. So I saw Sister Mary Jo, who had done all that inner healing work with me, 15 years later, by chance, really by a very quick invitation, like, hey, you should go check it out. These people do. Like, I mean, follow through and go. And, and in that moment the other piece that was happening was, it was confirmation. He's like, you need to come back to me. You need to come back to the church, Kim. This is where you belong. This is where you're meant to be. This is where you experienced all this healing. And I did, and I went back, and I had my kids baptized, and my daughter was confirmed just this year. And, my kids love the Lord, and I married my husband, and in the church, got to, went through all the process of annulment, and again, that is such a powerful process for anybody who ever fears that. I mean, you have to look at yourself in a way that, whoa, like, it is powerful. It is thorough. It really helped me to heal. It really helped me to heal in so many ways. And it's something that I don't feel proud of, right? That I was married that many times. But I do feel like the church has something in place to really address that, and to be very honest, right, about my part and the process. And I learned that, I wasn't prepared for marriage, like, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And then over the years I became prepared, right? And, the Lord just kept healing. So, I'm in, and now I work with severely mentally ill, right? And here I am counseling and ministering to them. And again, God uses all of my experiences in just powerful and profound ways. And, I think the most important is just that those are his children too. And he loves them, and he loves us all. And, when you know the love of Jesus, that is my prayer for every human being, to really know the love of Jesus, to know without a shadow of a doubt. And it doesn't mean you're going to feel perfect all the time, but that you're loved, like on a cellular level. There's nothing like it in the world. There's nothing like it in the world. And through that, I've been able to love. It is only through him that I love and that I can minister to these people. Like, I can't take any credit. Right? I showed up then, I show up now, sometimes broken and exhausted, but he shows up, right? He always shows up, right? And so, it really is his story. It's a beautiful story. And I'm so grateful for the Lord, so grateful for the church, grateful for all of those who faithfully served him. Thank you so much for asking me to do this. It's such a joy to share what he's done in my life. It's amazing. So thank you.
Kim, the honor and the thanks are mine. What a beautiful story. What a beautiful telling of it. And I'd like to have you back. And yes, we'll have Kim back. She is a wealth of information around healing through Jesus and through things that science has taught us as well. So, Kim, it's just the beginning. I feel like the Lord is doing more of what he said he was going to do for you way back when he told you in your prayer with Sister Mary Jo that he birthed you into this world for healing, to heal others. And I pray as we close this show that those of you who are listening, perhaps you've been and are perhaps going through some kind of abuse, whether it's sexual, emotional, or physical, or you're trying to heal and you have those same questions of why, Lord, why me, why this, I don't understand, are you even real, do you even care? Well, Kim has provided some of the answers that yes, you can heal. Yes, there's a reason, there's a purpose for you being here, and you too have been chosen to be a healer. And if there's some situation you need to escape, help the Lord help you to escape that situation, and do not ignore the red flags that he is waving in front of you. Do not put on those rose-colored glasses, but let yourself be alone for a while with God. Ask him to heal you and to guide you to the right people, the right places for that healing, because he will provide when you choose it. He will give it to you. And hang in there. Hang in there, because there is a better future for you. There's a better tomorrow. And for those who love God, all things work for good, even those things that are horrible and we can't understand. Because in the end, if you're faithful and you learn to forgive and you hang on to the truth, heaven is yours. Your reward will be greater than your greatest possible imaginings. Mm-hmm. And may you find something more. Find your way home. Yes. God bless you. Amen.
Amen.